Before we get started, I'd like to thank all of you guys for making my last video my top 10 games of all times, my personal highest views on the channel. Zach has had higher views. We passed it by like 100 views, so thank you for that. But now we're going to talk about Liza P. This game has gathered quite a lot of praise, got a couple of Game Awards nominations, and is considered by some to be From Software's first true competition in the Souls-like space. This is a high quality game with a lot to offer, but I'll just go ahead and warn you right now that personally I just don't like it quite as much as everyone else does. There are a lot of things that just don't jive with me, but I do recognize that it is a good game. First, let's break down the gameplay. Before we get into the rest of the video, I'd like to quickly announce my new Game Jam game for 70 FPS. I won't do a full announcement video on it, just this little thing. It's a short, sub 15 minute, action-packed, stylish shooter experience that I think you'll like. Please check it out on itch.io. The link should be in the description. The combat is a blend of the different Soulsborne combat systems, a bit of Souls, a bit of Bloodborne, and a bit of Sekiro. When I first started playing the game, I didn't particularly like the combat. There was a lot of idiosyncrasies between it and the Soulsborne games that tripped me up pretty much most of the first act. But when I finally got used to it, I did like it more, but I personally still don't like it quite as much as the Soulsborne combat systems. There are very deliberate choices to make this a slower paced and less fluid combat system, which doesn't really equate to easier, by the way. That's about on par with difficulty of the Souls games. There's nothing inherently wrong with these decisions, but I just simply much prefer the faster paced, smoother combat of the Souls games. To me, Liza P almost feels like a turn-based RPG in comparison. This is mainly due to the lack of attack animation canceling. You get sort of locked into a move once you've done it, and I really dislike having made a move and being stuck with it for what feels like forever, especially when I've already realized that decision has led to my death. Overall, the melee combat is generally good, but yet again, personally, it's just not near as good as Soulsborne, to me. There is also the Legion arm weapons, which are like Sekiro's prosthetic weapons. The ones I used were pretty good, but once I unlocked a rocket arm, I never saw much of a reason to use anything else. Also, the Legion arm mechanic is a more additive mechanic than the prosthetic arm in Sekiro, where a fair few of the fights in Sekiro felt like the prosthetic arm was mandatory, which that decision has its pros and cons for each game. When it comes to melee weapon variety, it's okay, but there's not quite as many different movesets as there are in most of the Souls games. There is a weapon combination system, which a lot of people really like, but for me, I just never found a combo that I felt was better than whatever regular weapon I was using at the time. I've talked a lot about the mechanics I don't like as much as the Souls games, but there are a few good new mechanics that maybe some of them could make their way into the Souls games. The first one I really like is that when you're out of healing charges, that if you can get enough hits on the enemy, you can get another one. And I really like how that motivates you to keep fighting when your health is low. I like the grindstone mechanic. It's a mechanic where you can apply different buffs to your weapons once per life. And the thing I like about it is that it's not finite, as opposed to the usable items in the Souls games. So you're encouraged to actually try using buffs. Oddly though, I think this game's best mechanic is a skill system called the P-Organ. Yes, that's what it's actually called. You use a rare upgrade material to acquire these smaller buffs, that are fairly good and significant, but once you attach enough of them to this bigger buff, you get the bigger buff. That's a very good and unique skill system that I like a lot, and I'd like to see it in other games. There's also your regular XP levels that you cash in, which is pretty well the same as in the Souls games. It's fine. For most of the game, there's decent enemy variety. The first couple areas are a bit weak in enemy variety. That being said, I think the visual aesthetics for the zombie faction are too similar for a lot of the different enemies. For me, the bosses sort of equal out to being alright. Some of them I think are fairly good, and some of them are kind of bad. One thing I really don't like about some of the bosses is they have really weak first phases that feel like they're there just to waste your healing charges, and more importantly, your time. Also, the difficulty curve for bosses is sometimes all over the place. The cathedral monster is one of the hardest fights in the game, but it appears really early on at the end of the first act. And the boss at the end of the second act, Victor, is one of the easiest bosses in the entire game. There are good bosses like the Black Rabbit Brotherhood. They're a fun multi-boss fight. All that being said, people made a big deal of how it's a good 4v1 fight, but it's not really a 4v1 fight because the bosses slowly enter the arena, and you'll most likely have killed one of them by the time the last boss shows up, so it's kind of disingenuous to say it's an actual 4v1 boss fight. The level design is alright. It's pretty linear, but that's fine. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. That is outside of this one section toward the end of the game where it's just a series of hallways with the same 3 or 4 enemies. I also want to talk about the big picture of how the game felt. I felt like the first act, the cathedral and everything before it, was fairly weak, but it did have a consistent upward slope of getting better. The second act was the best part, and I almost like it as much as everyone else does. But the third act, the junkyard and everything after that, slowly went downhill by being more dull and repetitive. It's not ruined, but it is a sort of a bummer. Now let's talk about the story. It is a more straightforward story and not obscured like the Soulsborne games. It is a fairly decent story. It does have some interesting twists on the Pinocchio tale, while other than being a steampunk reimagining where puppets are robots. The twists are with its theme about not lying, and it presents lying as being much more morally gray and less black and white, and also sort of brings up the idea that it's sort of part of being human. I can agree that it is a very human thing to lie. People are far from perfect. But that being said, I can't help but think that there couldn't be a worse time in history to say, well, lying can actually be kind of good sometime with all the social media and so-called journalism being very corrupt by a lot of lies, and nobody's side is fully false, by the way. Also, this story has a lot of the can AI become human stuff. I sort of don't like how toward the end there's something revealed that sort of kind of throws that all out by giving a more concrete answer. The story also builds a nice world that's a good and interesting setting. There's also a good cast of characters that are likable and or interesting. That is with one exception though. Jiminy, who in this version is a steampunk Amazon Echo, is freaking annoying and he won't shut up. Sometimes he destroys dramatic moments, like there'll be someone standing dramatically far away, and as you're walking up to them, it'll be like, "What? Who's that? I'm nervous, pal." And at one point, you're even on top of a high tower, and he happens to say, "Looks like you're stuck with me." And at that point, I really wanted there to be a button prompt to chuck him over the ledge. Yeah, so there's that. The visual aesthetics are generally pretty good, but for whatever reason, I don't like them as much as I would think I would like a steampunk Souls-like. I don't really know why. There's also some fairly good old-timey music. Overall, I recognize that this is a pretty good Souls-like, even if I don't click with it as much as everyone else seems to have. And before I give my final score, I would like to remind you that my scores are a mix of my critical insights and personal feelings toward the game. So I'm giving this an 8.67. By the way, if you have Game Pass, I believe this game is still on Game Pass. So if you want to find out if you're the type of person who would like it, that's a good opportunity there. Alright, so that's pretty much it. Thank you to anyone who likes, comments, or subscribes. That's it.